Hello, everyone. Great for you to join me today. We're talking about decorative stitches and all the fun things that we can do with them. And I did bring over a couple of examples of, and I love to play with them so that I just stitch them out just to give you an idea. With just beautiful stitches, right? We have yarn stitches and pop-up stitches and applique stitches, sequin stitches. We have stitches that nobody else has on a sewing machine. And sometimes we forget to have fun with them. So today we're going to talk about some different ways we can use them. And one of them is that we can taper our stitches. So if we wanted to turn around the corner to make a box, like a frame like this, that we can do it. Look at how beautiful those corners are. Very easy to do. A lot of our machines do have a menu of tapered stitches, and I'm on the Designer Epic 3. The Designer Epic 3 can taper almost all the stitches that are on your machine. So I'm going to go over and show you how that is, how it can be done and how easy it is. So I'm going to switch my camera, and I have, right now I'm on the needle, but I'm going to come over here because I forgot to move my camera back. All right, let me just, go here like that. All right, and zoom back. Meredith, I forgot to move my camera back. Sorry about that. All right, so this is a creative stitch. It's in the crafting menu B, and I pulled it up. And whenever you pull up a decorative stitch, if you can taper it, you're going to see that taper symbol right there. All right, and so all I have to do to taper the beginning and the end is open up the taper button, and I can select either the beginning and the end would be the same, or I could do a different beginning and the end, but I'm going to make it 45 degrees. And then it's going to show you exactly what that looks like. And you can see that there's another symbol that popped up here, and that is the reverse button. I'm going to show you how that works. Now, after I've done that, I can keep sewing, and I will keep sewing. And when I want to stop and have the pivot point come down to a corner like that, then I will touch the reverse button and it will stop and pivot at that point. Also, on my Epic 3, I do have the option of choosing stitch repeat and say, I just want to do 2 of these stitches. And then it will do the 2 stitches and it will stop and go down to the pivot to go down to that point without me even having to touch that reverse button. So first I'm going to show you the way to do it without, and then I'll come back and show you how that would work. So now we're coming back over here, and I'm coming back down to my screen so you can see. And I have my projector turned on, and I did something a little different with the projection. What I did with the projection is, instead of having the projection centered on my needle, where this center line will be on my needle or on the edge of the foot, I moved the projection line so that it was just to the right of the stitch. And this is going to become really important. Let me see if I can even zoom in a little more for you to see even better there. And when I stop, it is going to stop right at that corner of where the projection line is. So I'm going to press the start button again. And right now I'm using the projection line that's over on the edge of my fabric to make sure I sew straight. I'm going to touch the reverse button. It's going to finish the stitch and come down to the point. There we go. And I always want to stop with my needle in the down position when I do that, because it'll lift the foot up so that I can pivot and turn the corner. So notice the way when I turn the corner, I know I'm turning it at an exact right angle because the line from the grid will line up with the edge of my stitch. So this is a different way of using this stitch. Now, if I come back over here to my single stitch pattern, and I say that I want to use a single stitch pattern, it tells me how many stitches I did. Right now, oops, sorry about that. Right now, I have done 2 stitches. All right, when I open up the stitch repeat and I select it and turn it on, it tells me that I did 2 stitches. If I wanted to do a rectangle instead of a square, I could say, going the opposite way, I want to do 3 stitches. I can decide how I want that to be myself. But I'm going to leave it at 2, and then we'll come back over here so you can see the next step. And now it stops. Look at that. So this time it only did 2. And again, I have the grid line to be able to show me that I am turning at an exact 90-degree angle. And I also have a grid line over on this side. So I really can make sure that I'm going to have a perfect square or rectangle when I'm done. Now, very easy to keep going with this, but the exciting part to me is that all of these stitches can be brought into embroidery. And if you know that you want the frame to look exactly the way you want it to be an exact size, then what I'm going to do is, instead of you doing this in sewing, I can do it in embroidery. And then I know what my frame is going to look like before I start. And I can just press the start button and it will embroider my frame for me with no effort at all. Okay, let me just see here. I've got a couple of comments here. All righty. Oh my goodness, we got lots of you on here. I hope you guys are thinking of some questions to use. And I'm going to go back to my machine and we're going to move to embroidery so you can see how different the process is in embroidery from sewing. Okay, so you can see how beautiful that is. And if I wanted to turn the grid off, I will turn the grid off so you can see what it looks like, just how that corner, see how beautiful that corner is? All right, now we're going to go instead, I'll zoom out. We're going to go into embroidery. There we go. Now, I can go and stay in here if I want to move to the embroidery stitch out screen and come back to the stitch. Then instead of going to the home button, I'm going to touch the hoop that's on the top left-hand corner. And I don't even have my embroidery arm on right now because I'm not going to stitch it out. But you can see that you don't need your embroidery arm to be going to the embroidery edit screen. Now, if I wanted to bring in a row of stitches, I would go down to create sequence, or on some of our older machines, they would call that programming. And I'm going to go and I'm going to select the same stitch. And the stitch is in menu B1. And it's coming up right here. So there is the stitch. And I'm going to select it and duplicate it. So I have 3 of them. There's 1, 2, 3 stitches. And when I close down create sequence by touching the check mark, that same tapered button is right over there on the right. So to taper the corners, I would do exactly the same thing in sewing or in embroidery as I did in sewing. So there is my beginning corner and my end corner are tapered perfectly. And I can make the hoop bigger if I want to, but I think this design is going to fit in here. So to make my frame and see what those corners are going to look like before I stitch them out, I'm going to touch duplicate and I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees. So I touch rotate and 90 degrees. And now when I move this in here, I could just go in there and I just dropped it in place. You see how easy that was? You notice it was like a magnet, right? It actually, when I just dropped it in there, I'll just touch it again and select it. In a second here, instead of moving the background, I want to move the design. When I go in here and I just kind of approach where it should be, it automatically locks it into place. And a lot of people don't know why that is. And I think this is a really important thing to remember. If I go under hoop options, there is a button in here right up at the top that's called align. So if I do not have that selected, if I turn that off, and now I come back and I do that same process, in this case, it's not going to kind of like pull it in. I have to go and click, click, click it and move it into position. It doesn't know the exact location of that last stitch. So I am going to kind of move it manually. Whereas if I turn on that align button, now it's like there's a magnet that draws the last stitch to the first stitch. And so as I move it, as soon as I come in there close and I just drop it over there, it just automatically gravitates toward the last stitch. So that is a really amazing feature that is built in for when we're working with our decorative stitches. Now, if I wanted to put these two together as one side of the frame, it's showing up as two separate stitches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of them and group them together. And now they're, instead of it being two separate designs, it's one design. Now I'm going to duplicate that. And I need to rotate it twice. So I'm going to touch rotate twice. All right. And it's not in the right place right now. And you might even be able to have a hard time seeing the exact place, right? So here I've got the frame, both sides of the frame in place. And all I'm going to do is just drag it and move it close, and it automatically locks in there together. And then you can deselect to check to make sure it looks perfect. At the end, I'm going to do the same thing. Now I've got two separate designs. I'm going to select both of them and group them together. And now I have one frame that I can add my words. Maybe I want to make a quilt block out of this or other frames. And then the last thing I'm going to do, of course, is touch save. And I can make a folder in here called frames and save it with the name that I want to save it. And I will have that forever. I can come back a week from now or a year from now. Isn't that amazing? Does anybody have any questions?
Yes. So we've had a couple questions and a couple comments. I wanted to say that they really want to try this. They didn't know it was that easy, that they're excited to try it. Love the tutorial. A couple questions. Can this be done on a Sapphire 85, the tapering ability? And then
Sapphire 85 does have a menu of tapering stitches, and it's just that easy. Now, I don't believe on the Sapphire 85 it has that align button. So you're going to have to kind of go in, zoom in on the corner to make sure that the last stitch and the first stitch line up. Everything gets easier on the Epic 3, obviously. There has to be some differences, but I actually, it makes me wonder, maybe they've added it and I haven't looked. So I dare you to go and open up your hoop options and look and see if you have that align button in there. But even if you don't, you can go to your menu of tapering stitches, and the machines, there's a few of them that are in different places. Look somewhere between the Q menu, the R menu. It's one of those on the machines. And most of our machines, I know the Sapphire 85, the Diamond had a menu of the tapering stitches. What the nice thing is, and really the big advantage on the Epic 3 is, it's not just one menu. You can do that with all of the 9mm stitches, right? And I do have this here just so that you can kind of look at it. So when you're looking at the 9mm stitches and you're trying to visualize what it would look like if you tapered them, then by bringing them into embroidery and doing the tapering there, you really do have that ability to be able to visualize before you stitch it out. Even if you wanted to use these stitches in sewing, by bringing them into embroidery and seeing what that angle looks like and how they join together, you may think that there's a perfect stitch that's going to turn a corner perfectly, but then when you actually do the angle, you might not like it. Sometimes when I'm making stems and flowers and things like that, I might have the taper stitch start at more of an angle like this and then come down. Or when I've got leaves and things that are coming in and out of things, the more you play around with the tapered angles, the better ideas you get for how to use them. So I encourage you all to go on there and play with them. And there are some stitches you may not want to taper, but you can still use them in the embroidery stitch out screen. And a couple of them come to mind. So let me just show you another example of this, okay? So
and Karen, just to clarify, the Epic 1 and 2 can do this also.
There's a menu. They do have a menu of tapering stitches. So on the Epic 3, that button for the taper comes up whenever you're selecting your 9mm stitches. On the Epic 1 and 2, there's a menu of stitches toward the end. And Meredith, I will check this and I'll put a post in there of what the menu is. I didn't have the machine up. I think it's menu Q or menu R, one of those two menus. And even the Diamond has a menu of tapered stitches. But they're like, I think there's like 20 stitches in there that will do this, or 26 stitches. So Many of our machines can do this. I think even the Ruby, the original Ruby Deluxe and Royale has a tapered menu of stitches. So I'll double check on what the menu number is. But if you've never gone that far down into your menu of stitches, maybe it's try to open them up and look at them and see what every menu, it tells you what every menu is. So when you hit the right menu, you're going to know because it's going to say taper stitches. So I hope you're all excited to give it a try. I'm only going to be on a few more minutes, but let me go back and I want to show you a couple of other things, okay? But it is fascinating how we can use our decorative stitches, both in sewing and embroidery, and they've made it easier for than ever to be able to line them all up. So remember, on the other machines, like some of the diamonds and the rubies and those, they may not have that alignment button, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you're going to zoom in and use the arrow buttons to click it into place a little bit easier. All right, so let me come back to my machine, and I've deleted that stitch. And I want to show you the kind of stitch that may not be worth it. All right, so let's say I go to create a sequence, and on our other machines, it will be called programming. Create sequence and programming are exactly the same thing. All right, and this time I'm going to go to a satin or a scallop. All right, and I'm going to select this stitch right here. So there's the stitch, and I want to make a frame. Actually, I want to make a napkin with this. Let's pretend I want to make a napkin with this, right? So I can adjust my density by touching the button here. I'm going to make the density so it's a much fuller looking stitch. I can change the length of it, and then I'm going to touch duplicate, and I'm going to add them in. Okay, and that's how many I want. I want 5 of them, and I close that down. Now, this one is larger, so I'm going to need to use a larger hoop, which means I'm going to change my hoop. Instead of 100 by 120 by 120, let's make it 240 by, wait a second, 240 by 150. That'll work. All right, and then I'm going to close that down. And so there is my design, right? Now there's the same taper button. And I'll zoom in so you can see the stitch a little better. All right, so when I select the taper button, in this case, if I did the same 45 degrees, it really changed that corner completely. I don't know if I'm going to like it or not until I try it. You can see the beginning and the end. It almost has a little swirl to it, which I might not have expected, but let's duplicate it and then rotate it. And I can move it in and see what it's going to look like. All right, and I just drop it over there. Oops, I moved a little. There it is. Oh, isn't that beautiful? Look at that corner. So after I've done that, I'm going to select them both and group them together. So now they're one design. And I want it to move the design over so you can see the other end. I'm going to touch duplicate. There's the next design. I'm going to rotate it twice. Whoops, I didn't rotate it once. I didn't, just changed it 1 degree. So I rotated it twice. And now I'm looking at the bottom left-hand corner to make sure that that looks pretty. And how gorgeous is that? And by default, if one corner looks nice, all of the corners look beautiful. So before I go and move the whole design, I'm going to select all and group it, because now it's going to be one design. And now I can move them all. Now imagine if you were going to stitch that out and you wanted to be able to get it looking beautiful for the edge of a napkin. You can do this in the biggest hoop. All right, you can make this a 13-inch square if you want to. And the lovely thing about it is, if you stitch it with like linen or any kind of fabric you want to, you can stitch that satin stitch around the outside edge of the fabric, and then afterwards cut the fabric away. And because you're in embroidery, you can stitch this design a second time, and it'll stitch that satin stitch over the raw edge. And if I'd been thinking about it, I actually have a couple of samples of that done. So next time that I'm thinking about it, I'll try and show you that. I think that, Meredith, do we have any questions?
Yes. Somebody said, and I think they probably came in a little bit late. They said, is this presentation only for embroidery machines?
No, it's not at all for embroidery. Everything we can do in sewing is for that we can do in sewing. We can do in embroidery if you have an embroidery. But if you have a sewing machine that has the tapered stitches in them, and we do have some sewing machines that have the tapered stitches in them, then, and I'll go back over. I think we've got a couple more minutes, right, Meredith? We're all right?
Oh, yeah, you're fine, Karen.
All right. So all I'm going to do to go to sewing is I'm going to touch the zigzag. And let's say I wanted to do that exact same stitch. All right. So I'm going to go to my stitches and I'm going to select scallop and satin and scallop stitches. Let me see if I can remember what stitch I selected. Was it this one here, I think? All right. So I selected, now I'm in the sewing mode, not embroidery. And I always like to look at the stitch the way that it's developed. And where it says length, the next to that, there's always a toggle switch that if I want to make that satin stitch a little fuller looking, that I can change that like that. And now I'm ready to choose my tapering option. So I'm going to take the tapering option like that. And I can close that window down and I can see the beginning and the end taper. If I wanted to select a certain number of stitches, I mean, I can just go ahead and start sewing. Let me just put a new fabric in here and I'll show you how this works out. Maybe I would have been better to put 3 of them because it'll start and stop earlier. Okay, so now I'm over on my machine. All right, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see. I really do love to put on, if you're on the Epic 3, turning the projection on really does help to keep this straight when you're sewing. So if I turn the projection on, it will show me the stitch and it will also show me the grid line. So let's say that I wanted to come this close. So this time I'm going to use this grid line along the edge of the fabric. And so I'm not looking at the needle and I'm not looking at the stitch. All I'm doing is looking at the grid line here. Whoops. Something's not threaded right. So let me just stop for a second here. I got an error message. So maybe my fabric was floating around. Let's just take that out. Oh, and you know, we all have on all of our machines a magical button. It's called the stitch restart. Let's assume that this is correct here. All right. And on the Epic 3, the stitch restart is here. Oops, right there. All right. So now it's going to start that stitch back at the beginning. And on the all of our other machines, it kind of looks like a triangle shape that you go to do stitch restart. So let's see what's going on here. And I'm going to just start it up again. Okay. And oh, I was going to use my foot pedal, but it wasn't plugged in. Hold on 2 seconds. The best of all plans. If I get a message like that, I usually find it's probably better to start with with your foot pedal instead of the start stop button. All right. So again, I'm looking at where the grid line is lined up with the edge of my fabric. All right. And since I made the design a little denser, I'll show you what it looks like. Now, because I set the number of stitches, I don't have to touch the reverse button on the Epic 3. But on our other machines, when you want it to go and come down to that angled point, then you need to touch the reverse button and it will bring it down to that angled point. You can see what it's looking here. I've got a little bit more to finish. And it should be coming up. This one is the end. Oh. And now it's going to stop. Okay, so see, I touched the reverse button. Now, if I had on my Epic 3 gone to the stitch repeat, I could have selected how many I wanted. But if I'm not on the Epic 3, then I need to touch the reverse button like that and stop with the needle down and see how pretty that looks. And now it's ready to turn the corner, and I can use on my Epic 3 the grid line if I have it to make sure I'm turning it in the exact right angle. If you're on another machine that is not the Epic 3 that has these tapering stitches and you want to build these frames, then usually what I do is I'm going to draw some lines with a blue wash away pen so that the line will line up with the one outside edge of the stitch. Because then when I turn the corner, I know that I want that line to be along that edge of my stitches, and it'll make it easier to go. And now when I start again, I don't need to touch the reverse button again. All I'm going to do is just start sewing, and it will taper that corner perfectly. And I won't continue, but I wanted you to see that corner. See how beautiful that corner is? It's gorgeous, isn't it? So if you have a menu of stitches that can do all of these fabulous things, oh, look at that, my camera went out. If you have a menu of stitches that can do all these fabulous things, then make sure that you're using them and give them a try because they really are beautiful. I'm not sure what happened to my other camera, so I'm going to come back over here to this one so you can see me, and I'm going to say goodbye. And I hope you've enjoyed that, and really get out the stitches, start playing with them. Whether you're in sewing or embroidery, start playing with your stitches and you're going to just love them. I'm jinxed today with my cameras. I'm not sure what's going on, but I hope there's a wonderful Friday for you and that you play with your stitches, and I will make sure to cover any questions you have. So if you have a question, write them down and I will come back and answer them for you. Goodbye, everybody.